Hello, welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm going to be doing my 14.4 mid-lane tier list. So if you enjoy the content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. To move, there were a decent amount of changes this patch. A couple of buffs, a couple of nerfs, and then the adjustments towards lethal tempo and some of the mana items have left a pretty big mark within the mid-lane tier list. So let's cover them. Ari is the first one I want to talk about, who is very, very close to being moved up into the S+ tier. She kind of leads the S tier now. Her pick rate almost doubled. Her pick rate over doubled. Combined with that, her win rate shot up. Her durability is now a lot more. She feels for durability a lot more. Combined with like a 10% AP ratio on Q, that is both the outgoing and the ingoing. So 5% outgoing, 5% ingoing. She is now performing a lot better. A solid S tier option. She has been buffed twice now this season, and it's put her in a really good spot. That combined with the major item buffs, very nice for her. Jace is going to move up to the A tier. So Jace has found a lot better of a position within the meta now. He's still not quite there. He's decent, but you do need to be very proficient at playing him. He's one of the more solid AD options within mid to high elo. Low elo, I'd still recommend playing something like a Tristana or an Apheri. They tend to be easier to pilot there, but he's a solid option, a good A tier pick. Kaiser did get buffed by like 500 range on the ultimate at rank 1. Of course, this scales down to being not a buff at max rank in R, but you don't tend to hit max rank in R. Playing Kaiser ADC. Kaiser mid is a bit more realistic, but even then, it wasn't that big of a buff. She stays within the C tier. I'm not a huge fan of Kaiser mid. I think there is a lot of easier to execute poke options if you are playing that like AP poke Kaiser. But she does have strength in her mobility on like fight tempo, which can be quite important. But I'd still recommend other champions which are easier to execute and can sometimes do her job a bit better. Renekton is going to move up to the A tier. Well, Renekton's actually going to be added to the A tier. He's not on the tier list. He is now in the tier list. Renekton mid has always been a very solid option. Oftentimes it does outperform Renekton top. If you are opting into something like the PTA W max variant, where you go 3 points Q, W max, you're picking up something like a Tiamat, so you can get one-shot backlines, then yes, he is very strong with this kind of build variation. You can of course still opt into like a Q max, W max, with PTA, that still functions quite nicely. The E cooldown buff was very big. That combined with the ults gaining more health as you put points into it is also very nice. Allows him to be a stronger frontline option, especially later on into the game. Yeah, he's a very solid option. You do want to be looking at items like Eclipse. It is very good on him. Yeah, solid A tier option. Asol is going to stay within the S tier. Asol got nerfed, or he got changed, and then hotfix nerfed and then nerfed again. And he's still performing quite well. He's around a similar power level to where he was in previous season. The Liandry's variant, Riley, Liandry, stuff like this, still very nice on him. Because his main constraint was mana for a while, that getting buffed has done a huge amount for his kit, and that's why he is able to still hold a position in the S tier. He doesn't do as much damage as before, and his E doesn't give him as many stacks, but the Q dropping in mana combined with giving a couple more stacks on it, yeah, quite nice. So he is a solid S tier option. You do want to scale throughout the game still, though. He is still very much a scaling skewed pick. Twisted Fate got nerfed this patch. He stays within the S+ tier. Both the AD and the AP builds perform really well. The AD builds do outperform the Roa and the Lich Bane variant at the moment, even within the mid lane. They are trying to rectify that next patch, and I do imagine it'll probably drop him down towards the S tier, but he is still a solid S+ option. I put him in the S tier in top lane purely because of the fact that you can like alternate the hit between him and Vayne. I'd recommend Vayne over Twisted Fate at the moment in the top lane, but in the mid lane, Twisted Fate still very strong, has more variety in the fact that he can go both the AP and the AD builds, whereas you don't tend to see AP variants of Twisted Fate top, even though it can function. It's just not as good usually. But yeah, he's a solid S+ option, still very good. So moving up 2 champions into the S+ tier, Karma and Talia. Karma is probably what I'd recommend as the premier mid lane pick at the moment. Gaining CDR on Malignance was really huge for her, combined with nerfs to some of the other things within the mid lane. It has allowed her to really shine. She did get nerfed after her like bunch of buffs, but even then she still performs really well. Mid lane is probably her best, it is her best role, and she kind of stands in a really good spot. As being a relatively easy to play champion, does huge amounts of damage, scales not too bad, does kind of spike mid-game though, but yeah, definitely what I'd recommend as being the premier mid lane pick. Talia also very strong at the moment. The buffs to Luden's companion also gaining CDR was really nice for her, and yeah, it's put her in a really good spot. She usually sits around the S plus tier. She does answer a lot of what is popular within the mid lane in solo queue. You do want to play her against like the Yasuos, the Yones, where you can really capitalize on the fact that they're high mobility champions. Of course, things like Aurelia, if you see it in the mid lane, also quite a good answer to that. But yeah, overall, Talia, solid S plus option. Kassadin, going to move up onto my S tier. Really benefited from the ability haste buffs on Seraphs and Malignants. Both these items getting buffed were really huge for him. Roa getting buffed in the patch before was also really nice for Kassadin. It's put him very close to the S plus tier. However, I am going to drop some champions down as I don't want to like overfill the S plus tier. So I will get bound to that in a second. Gragas is also going to move up into the the S tier. Gragas was a really big beneficiary of Roa buffs. He also himself did get buffed. He gained a bit more durability, a bit more armor. His R cooldown also got reduced a bit. It allows him to fish for picks more often. And overall, has been very good for Gragas. Is a very good top laner, very good mid laner. Tends to not be as performant within the jungle where you are going like more of those AP heavy builds. He can still be flexing support. However, mid top, I'd really recommend playing him here. He is very good in these roles, and yeah. Nivea is the final champion who I'm going to move up to the S tier. Also, really big beneficiary of Malignance and Archangel's buffs. Really wants both these items. Really important for her. Roa getting buffed was also really big for her. Kind of like Kassadin, benefits from all these items and has put her in a really good spot. So, solid S tier option. Moving some champions down. So, Vladimir no longer sits in the S plus tier. He actually sits towards the back end of the S tier. He has been falling as a lot of other champions have been buffed up. Some of the champions are quite nice against him. He also had Riftmaker nerfed twice, I believe. Riftmaker got nerfed. It had its like cost increased. Actually, no, it had its cost increased. It hasn't been nerfed past that, I don't believe. But it definitely did hurt him. He does want this item quite heavily. Leandri still very good on him. He's still a solid S tier option. If you can pilot the champion well, then he's still very good. Just not as good as a lot of the S plus options. Zac is going to move down to the S tier, so Zac is still very strong. He's like a high S tier option. He's the premier tank mid lane pick at the moment. He has really good build variations. He is being nerfed next patch because of how strong he is in top and mid, but I'm not quite as confident as being like an S plus pick in the mid lane as in the top lane. Sometimes you do just want more of a heavy AD or an AP option, and tanks tend to slot in better within the top lane at the moment, but he's still a very solid option. He's not suddenly like significantly weaker, he's just not as strong as the high S plus options. Akshan gonna also move on to the S tier once again, also very strong still, just cutting down the amount of champs in the S plus tier, and he's a bit weaker than them, so he also drops down here. Yone going to move down to the A tier. So Yone was tagged pretty heavily with the lethal tempo nerfs. Him and Yasuo lost a decent amount of win rate. They kind of sit towards the back end of the A tier. I'd recommend Yone over Yasuo still. So Yasuo is more like it is probably the closest towards being a B tier option. Yone has a bit more room to kind of he scales a bit. I mean, Yone's scales a bit better and has a bit more room to utilize those lethal tempo buffs. So he's not as heavily punished, but yeah, they are both weaker for sure with the nerfs towards lethal tempo. So they are both A tier options. Singe also going to drop down to the A tier. He's just not performing as well as he was in the mid lane towards the beginning of the season. The nerfs combined with nerfs to some of his items has hurt him a bit, so he falls within the A tier now. And Cassante, I'm going to drop Cassante down to the C tier. He's performing a bit worse with the nerfs. Having less mobility and no slow on empowered Q has definitely put him in a weaker position. It makes him more punishing to play. The base stat buffs weren't really enough to really compensate it, and it wouldn't surprise me if they do buff him in like 14.6 as they are not buffing him in 14.5, and he is definitely underperforming. Alongside this, though, there are lots of good mid laners at the moment. A lot of them are like the standards from last season, where you are looking at like your Roa, Durab, like kind of like bruiserish battle mages. Things like Kassadin, Ari, Anivia, all very strong. Cassiopeia tends to fall within this bracket as well. There are just lots of good S-tier options. Of course, for AD Assassins, both Kiana and Talon are very good at the moment. If you can pilot Kiana, she is a very strong S+ option. I would recommend playing something a bit more simpler if you are struggling on this. Then I would recommend something towards like the Tristana, as she is like the easiest to pilot AD mid laner. And then if you're looking for like a more assassin heavy option, then yes, something like an Aphiri. If you put the games into Renekton, he's also a very solid option, has good gank setup, strong early game. There are options there. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the mid lane. Thank you guys for watching. See you guys. Goodbye.